Good morning, everyone, and happy Pi Day. My name is Kelly Weber. I'm with Turnkey Consulting. I'm a senior manager there, and I've been doing security and risk and compliance for over 10 years, almost 15 years now. And I'm excited to be speaking on this topic, and I'll hand it over to Carrie to introduce, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Kelly. So my name is Carrie Bowman, and I am a Senior Director of Product Marketing with Pathlock. And similar background to Kelly's, I spent about 12 years in consulting. So I was a subject matter expert for access implementations for applications, and then the risk and compliance around that. So creation of risk rule sets, putting in place governance practices and processes, and I do have my CISA, so I'm a certified information systems auditor as well. So try to tie together the practical needs of IT and business along with the audit requirements of those, and that is what brought me over to Pathlock. And so excited to present with Kelly today and to talk about this. And again, we definitely encourage questions throughout. We love to hear from you what you're looking to gain from the session, or if anything has piqued your interest in particular. So please drop those questions in as we go.
Perfect. All right, so we will dive right in here. We're first going to talk about the why accelerating risks management and enabling maturity is important, and why we need to keep it at the front of our minds when implementing any systems that we implement. And then Carrie's going to talk about a little bit about the how and how we can actually do that. All right, so we all know that there is a massive push for our IT organizations to do cloud first. So 85% of organizations will actually be cloud first by 2025. And on average, the number of SaaS applications used in businesses is 138 to share and store data by companies. And businesses are evolving and growing application landscape complexities. And so also that means that the complexity of the risks and how to actually manage those risks in that environment is introduced. So we know that organizations are dealing with significantly more in distributed business processes, using many different tools for their critical business applications. And with that means that the IT and business and audit, they all need to be aligned and understand their landscapes. We're seeing a lot of times when I go into new clients you know, they want us to implement one simple system or take a look at one simple system, but really the reality is that they have their applications coming in from different, they have their information and their data coming in from all different kinds of sources. And usually I ask, do you have an architecture diagram? Do you have like a landscape diagram of what stuff is? And 90% of the time, the clients are saying, no, I don't have that. So we actually will sometimes go and just make sure that they have that there, because it's the risk landscape and the application landscape is incredibly complex. So a lot of clients, again, are using multiple platforms. Some clients may be using one platform for HR, where they're implementing or they're putting new employees in there, and a completely different one for finance, and then another different one for payroll. Now, when you're looking at the application, one simple application, you're looking at the risks in a silo, right? You're looking at it just for that application. But we're really pressuring users or pressuring clients and encouraging them to look at their risks as a whole and looking at how to actually manage their risks across the environment and from their environment as a whole. Carrie, are there anything that you're seeing for this, or like, do you have any thoughts on the big push for cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about when SOX came about, for those of us here in the States, it's been just over 20 years ago, we all had a lot of monolithic ERP systems, right? You had an SAP or maybe an Oracle, a NetSuite, a PeopleSoft, things like that, where we were housing the majority of our functionality. But as cloud apps have come around, they allow us to do a better job for those specific areas, right? Salesforce for managing maybe our order to cash pieces and our customers. If you're in the SAP world, maybe you use Ariba for your invoicing. Or if you're in manufacturing, maybe you're using a Coupa or a Manhattan or a Blackline. So it's great. Those line of business apps and the cloud functionality, it makes it faster. They're better at those processes. So we've seen the shift towards that, but audit is trying to keep up with that. So when SOX was introduced, it was, lock down your main ERP system for the risks that are in there. And it's trying to catch up with this trend now with line of business apps where we start to disperse the business processes. Now it's saying, are you aware of the new risks that have been incurred because someone has a piece of access in one system and a piece of access in another, and you just don't have that visibility across applications? And as an auditor, or myself when I used to work on the IT side of the house, the biggest risk is the unknown. We don't know what we don't know. So we may not have any risks, but I have no way to prove that out to audit or to my leadership who's coming and asking those questions if I don't have any visibility. So that's where we've seen the shift, I would say probably in like last 3 to 5 years or so. That's becoming more and more prevalent as these cloud apps become used more frequently and with more functionality in them. So I think from my perspective, that's where a lot of the drive is coming from is the hybrid environments let us do things better, but the result of that is now we have to think about a new way of working, how we monitor it.
Absolutely. And I see, a lot of companies think, oh, great, it's cloud, now someone else is managing it. But the reality is that the risk that, the organizations in the business still own that risk. So
yes.
We need to be very careful about saying, great, now we don't have the infrastructure, so there's not, there's not the risks with the infrastructure, but there still is risk with data. And also just, making sure that your third party in the cloud, the SaaS applications that you are implementing, that those third parties are in alignment to what your compliance and governance is for your organization. So vetting those third parties. Right. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. Right. But the oh my gosh, the excess access problem, that's a little bit of a mouthful, but there are, a lot of times organizations are putting, they just want to make it work. Security is kind of a second thought as far as, we just want to get this up and running. We want to make sure that the functionality is there and granting a lot of access. And then over time, for years and years, people are requesting access, they need more access, and so we grant them access because we want to make the business happy, and we're saying, great, now it's working. But, there are so many issues with excess access. So 75% of cloud security failures are a result from inadequate management of identities, access, and privileges. And I would say this is not only just cloud security, but also on-prem as well. And 90% of permissions granted to accounts on cloud applications are unused. I see this a lot of times also in SAP environments and in on-prem environments as well. This is not just cloud, but across the landscapes of your systems and your applications. So, we know that users need to be able to request and be granted access in a reasonable time frame to support business, but that doesn't mean that we should be granting them just whatever they want. And what that really means from a security perspective is making sure that you're designing and understanding those roles and those business roles and what those users actually need. And a lot of times that means actually taking a little bit of extra time in the design phase and in the implementation phase and going and talking to those lines of business and those business leaders and asking them, like, what are you actually doing? And that also means sometimes allowing yourself to have extra time for testing, because when you really limit that access, then the testing sometimes can take a little bit of time. So I would recommend definitely just allowing yourself time to design the roles and also just the position-based security. If you're going to do that, like, what are these users actually doing in order for their jobs? Just as an example, I was recently at a client that They had implemented SAP years and years ago. They were on an on-prem system, but they had 8,000 users, and they hadn't done a user access review for 5 years. And then we went in and we ran the risk analysis, and the risk analysis, I mean, it blew up. There was so much data in there. And even for us to go in and say, okay, well, how can we even do a role redesign was difficult because they had so much access. So what that meant was that a very painful process of reviewing access and redesigning the roles and making sure the roles were up to date. And it took us, a year and a half to do this. Whereas if you're doing a user access review on a periodic basis, biannually, even just annually, quarterly, whatever you're doing, that really allows all of that excess access to be managed and maintained, which then results in less risk in your environment. It results in users actually having the access that they need in order to do their job and not additional access. Another example I'll just say of this too is that I'm seeing some organizations, again, they want to implement things and they want to do it fast. We live in a very fast-paced world. And so security is cut from the implementations, right? And they say, oh, well, anyone can do security. We'll have a basis person, we'll have the functional people request the access or do the access for the security. I was a couple of years ago, I went, they asked us to come in and look at a project that was just about to go live. They didn't understand what the problem was because their auditors had came to do an audit right before they went live. They had a bunch of risks, and they said, well, hang on a minute, Bart, the implementation went really well, the UAT went really well, the testing went really well. We even finished, before, we even finished in like record time. And I thought, okay, well, that's good, that's interesting. So we went in, and Carrie, you can probably guess what the problem was. We went and did, like, within a day, we said, well, your testers and your business users were testing with SAP all. Oh, well, we didn't realize that, we just gave them all the access because we wanted them to work. Well, you can't do that. I mean, simple things like that. And it wasn't because, it wasn't nefarious. It wasn't because they wanted to, they just wanted to make sure that business users, when they were testing it, a failure, when they did put one goal on, that it would make it work and have that test. They just put SAP all. Great, it passed. So, and for those of you that maybe aren't aware of SAP, it's basically an authorization for everything. It's like an administrative privilege, right? For everything you can have access to. So, it's really important that you get the right people involved and you get security involved at the beginning, the design phase, so that they can really design that access in accordance to what those business processes are doing. Carrie, any thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's a perfect example in both cases of why this conversation is so important, because we want to give them the access to do what they need to do, but nothing additional, right? We do want to follow that least privileged access model. And when we think of excess access, it is this concept of, and like you said, certifications are so important because we need to be able to give people the access to do their job, meaning as they start the business new or as they change positions. And typically as businesses, we're very good at giving them the access they need because we don't want to slow down or stop the business. What we're not great at doing is taking that access away when it's no longer needed. The use case of someone backing up their new hire or their replacement for a while is really, really common. And forgetting to take that access away after that time period ends. So certifications are a great way to mitigate that risk of stale access sitting out there for those users. And then things like, depending on what your system may be, really utilizing that functionality of usage tracking. So if you have SAP, Oracle, a handful of other applications, they actually have the ability to track usage. Ariba, I know Dynamics 365 is working on it, the way that it's stored. So depending on which application you're utilizing, you should definitely look into if usage is available, because what that will help you do is make those decisions around as you're recertifying access for users. If they're not using it, they don't need it. That makes it really easy. So yeah, just anything that we can do to make sure that our business can perform what they need to, but that we're not unnecessarily introducing risk into the environment is definitely a goal.
Yeah, and I agreed. Usage is vitally important for us. I also would add as well to that I'm not only just looking at the usage, but also going and talking to those managers and those line leaders of that business to say, do you really actually need this? Because even if you were to put, a transaction code or entitlement that a user has only used once or twice, doesn't necessarily mean that user actually needs it. So really having the conversation and diving deep with actual business is crucially important.
Absolutely. You mentioned the silos in the previous slide, and I think that's something that as we start getting more of these line of business applications, which again, they're best in breed, they're best in class, it really helps us do a better job as a business. What that opens us up to is really having a silo or a lack of understanding between IT, who supports those applications, and the business who's utilizing those. So the more that we can get rid of those silos and really have that cross-functional conversation between those teams, it's going to make everyone's job easier. Business will be able to better articulate to IT the access they need, and IT will have a better understanding of how to support the business with what they need in the permissions that are designed in the applications themselves that they grant out to their users.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a slide on silos in particular. So I know that you and I both have strong opinions on silos. So
yes.
All right. I think the cost of risk exposure. As Carrie mentioned, in 2008, when SOX became the big push for security and IT security, it was more of a, this could possibly happen to you. So let's make sure, that you get that we are managing the risks in the environment. Now we know. I mean, it's happened. It's here and it's happening, and it's not it's a when, it's an if. Or I'm sorry, other way around. It's not an if, it's a when, right? So we're seeing it every day more and more in the news. These massive companies are having breaches and they're getting attacks. And the average cost of a data breach is $4.45 million. It's not a small cost. And I'll tell you, this number frustrates me a little bit because I know that Carrie will attest to this, that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were telling clients and organizations, hey, like, this is going to be massive, and you guys it will be a big cost to your organizations. And a lot of times we weren't taken seriously because it just wasn't realized. The risk was not realized. Now it is.
I would say, yeah, I mean, so I was in consulting for 12 years. I've been in the space for a total of 15. And I would say in the 12 years that I was in consulting, about 1 in 3 customers that came to me to do a security redesign and a controls process implementation, it was because they had had a breach, and it usually cost them somewhere between 1 to 3 million. And that was more than a decade ago, and the cost just keeps going up. And the frustrating part is, this is the monetary value that someone has fraudulently stolen from you. This isn't the reputational damage that goes along with that, the impact to your internal structures and possibly like an upheaval of your leadership, or the cost following that, right? So if this breach happens, all hands on deck, right? You start rechecking everything, revalidating, auditing everything. So this is just the money someone takes from you. It's not all of the dominoes that fall afterwards. So yes, we've been trying to say this for years and years, and now we're starting to see it in headlines. It's not held in-house anymore. You're starting to see headlines that come across 3 million here, 9 million here, 6 million here. And you mentioned third parties earlier and how third parties gain access. As we bring in more third parties, we're continuing to expand the risk exposure that we have. So now this is becoming even more real than it ever was before, because it's not just our in-house employees that we have to worry about potentially causing this data breach. It's access that we give to anyone. So yes, it's here, it's real. If you didn't listen to us 15 years ago, please listen today. Just take it into account. We want to be proactive and prevent that.
Absolutely, yeah, and definitely. I think, I think, again, I'm going to talk about silos again. I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but you know, a lot of times we're really good at managing risks with an application or a singular application. You know, and I'll just give an example I was at an organization where, you know, they had their SAP risks managed quite well. Actually, they had position-based security. They did a role redesign. They rolled it out. You know, the business was really involved in it. They understood the access. They, you know, had audits, and they were doing really well with their external audits. And they were managing, again, like just the SAP application really well. And so we said, hey, you know, you need to kind of move forward, and let's like look at the landscape as a whole. Let's maybe look at, you know, establishing a zero trust perimeter here, and looking at cyber attacks and network attacks. And so they installed an intrusion detection. But what they did was they just installed it. That's all that they did. So they didn't take the time to actually understand what the alerts were, to manage that, and then to act on those alerts when they came up. And, you know, we really push them and advise them to say, hey, make sure that you are looking at this and have, you know, you have your process in place, and your alert detection and your alert prevention and all of that in place. And they didn't do it. They put some person on as the administrator on it that had no training, didn't know what they were doing. I mean, and come, you know, 2 years later, they were in the news. They had a massive, massive ransomware, and they ended up paying $11 million to resolve the attack. And again, like Carrie said, that's what they paid in order to get their systems back. So that doesn't include the operational costs. It doesn't include the reputation deterioration of that ransomware. And they, you know, it's frustrating to me because that really could have been avoided, you know, if they would have listened to us in the first place. So I think that you know, Carrie and I have both been pushing this boulder uphill for years. I think that we are starting to see, you know, leadership and CEOs and CIOs really starting to wake up that this is important and it needs to be taken seriously, and security needs a seat at the table for these discussions. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's a great way to wrap this slide up, is just, you know, the cost of risk exposure. I hate to say it, but a lot of times understanding the risk out there is what helps to get budget for these type of projects. So if you're an IT person wanting to secure your system better, if you are a business or application owner who is thinking about how your teams utilize the system, and you're concerned about maybe risks that are exposed, and how your data, especially as a business owner, how your data is being seen or used by people, or if you're the auditor who's wanting to just help bring that to light, for better or worse, sometimes statistics like these can help to drive that conversation. So that's the goal of this, is not to scare anyone, just to prepare and put some information in your hands that can help you to make that business case to your leadership about what you may be able to do to be better secured and avoid consequences like this.
Definitely. And I think our next slide is the slide that we've all been anticipating. So I probably won't talk about this one actually too much, because we've already talked about this, but you know, silos and inflexible risk management. You know, I think you know, we talk about you know, cyber attacks and, you know, how we were pushing that boulder uphill. Now is the silos. We really need to kind of get our arms wrapped around understanding and bridging the gaps between IT and business, because so many businesses are just operating, you know, just with their business lines of business. Right? They understand finance, they know how to do finance, but what they don't understand maybe is the impact of that has on the materials, you know, in the warehouse, or you know, HR. How does that actually impact HR? And as security, you know, I talk about this with my clients a lot. Is that you know, security is a little bit of the the main spoke, right, that kind of bridge those gaps, because we do have to go and talk to all of those lines of business to understand their risks in order to have a more holistic approach with dealing with risks, and it allows us to be partners with all those teams. And then, to go a step further in our in those discussions is to actually then bridge the gap between those two different teams. I was implementing a big, massive project a couple years ago, and it was a system where they had everything embedded into one. So someone requested one access to one place, and then it would filter down through all kinds of different applications: Ariba, Concur, SuccessFactors, Fiori, all kinds of good stuff, right? And as security, we were managing and looking at the risks throughout the, the cross-system risks, and looking at, how a user would get access there and there. And part of that, during one of the UAT, I said, your, in Ariba, your organizational data, your cost centers and your profit centers, they're completely different than SuccessFactors. They are not aligning, which is the reason why, our access wasn't aligning. We had no idea. This was like 4 or 5 weeks into UAT. They had no idea that they actually had completely different master data in their systems. So this is what I'm talking about, bridging the gap. And just understanding that and knowing where the data is and understanding the data from security and having those conversations. And if it doesn't look right, probably isn't, right? So ask the question. Don't just try and shove things in and make things work and put the Band-Aid on it. Really look at what the root cause is and have those conversations between the lines of business.
Yeah, I love the statement, everyone having a seat at the table. I think you nailed it with that. The goal here is that we want everyone to be successful, and to do that, we need everyone's perspective, because again, someone who's sitting on the business side of the house, you have a different perspective than the IT person who's supporting it. Same thing for IT. They may know how the system functionally works and what the possibilities are, but they may not understand exactly how the business wants or plans to use something. And so having that conversation is imperative, and audit being included from the start in those conversations, they can help layer in that concept of risk of, hey, have you thought about this, or the impact if you do X, Y, Z, and helps them to plan ahead for that. So the more that we can have those inclusive conversations, the more successful we'll all be at, running our systems daily without having issues, and being able to pass our audit successfully at the end of the day.
Yeah. And sometimes that means too, changing your initial strategy too, and understanding each group, because one group may not have, they may be new to risks and compliance. They may have no idea what we're even talking about. And so understanding who is actually at the table as well, and having conversations with, like, what do you know about security, and not treating them like, oh, you don't know this, or, well, you need to do this. Hey, this is like, not being the red tape, but really being an enabler of them to be able to do their jobs well, so that they can feel empowered and have, you make the right discussions or make the right decisions and have the right discussions. So.
Absolutely. So now that we've kind of level set with the why, we want to talk about the how. So we've said why all of this is important, but at the end of the day, is that very valuable if we can't give you some tangible steps to walk away with? So like I said, I really like to use the why to start with, to set the table for if you are trying to internally make a business case to tackle some projects like this, or implement some governance programs like what we've talked about today. We want to set you up to be able to succeed in having those conversations. And then this is the how. So I like to take a bit of a pragmatic approach and just, literally visualize what it looks like, depending on where you are in your governance journey. So a lot of you, if you have an audit background, would be familiar with the capability maturity model, which is basically just a model that, similar to this, stair steps up, with the idea being that you start out at the simplest form for all of your governance processes and your IT processes, and then you mature those as an organization. And what that looks like is you start with just documenting your policies and procedures. How do people access the system? How are they approved for access? How will you review access to the system, or how will you review audit requirements? It's just documenting those so that everyone agrees and is on the same page for what those steps look like. The second step there is basic automation. We all know that automation is both faster, so it's more efficient for us to gain access to things, or to change access, or to review or provision, to test, right? Automation is always faster. Automation also takes some of the human error out of things. So being able to, for example, run risk analysis in a standardized fashion, being able to run a risk check as we're doing provisioning so we can identify upfront if there are any risks before we provision out. All of that automation makes that easier and more standardized. So basic automation is the next thing we want to go to. Application access governance, this is that next step. This is where we're layering in risk to the basic automation. So if we think about something as simple as our access policies, so how are users provision access into our system? Let's say our documented policy is that users must request access, it must be reviewed by their manager, it must be reviewed by the owner of the role or responsibility or entitlement in the application itself, and then a risk check must be run to ensure we're not provisioning them with SOD or sensitive access risks that aren't mitigated. If needed, we assign a mitigating control, and then access is provisioned out into the system. That's kind of an ideal process, right? We've got all the key players involved in doing approvals, and we're checking for risk before we provision out access. And if risk is required because of that person's job responsibility, we're going to go ahead and put a mitigating control in place. So essentially, we're not introducing any net new risk into the environment before it's been reviewed and approved. So maybe that's our policy. We've documented all those steps. That's great. We can do all of those things manually. It will take more time, and it's open to human error or unintentional skipping of a step, right? So we move to basic automation. Basic automation is usually just the provisioning piece. Someone maybe puts in a ticket in ServiceNow or Zendesk or something like that. You put in a ticket, and that ticket is routed to the manager for approval, then to the role owner for approval, and then to IT, who probably still has to manually do the SOD check and respond back. And when it's approved, then IT may be able to go provision manually, or they may be able to automate that provisioning. But usually at this basic step, there's some things that we can't automate, like an SOD check, and things like that. So application access governance is going to be the continuation of that. It's going to be where that risk is layered in automatically, so that rather than having to go through a ticketing system for one piece of it and then a tool for the other, it's fully integrated. So whether you start with the ticketing system and it pushes to the tool and the tool does the last mile, or the tool is the start and end for all of it, either way, you're from the point that you request access, everything is automated. The routing to the manager for approval, the routing to the role owner for approval, the automation of that fine-grained SOD and sensitive access check to ensure that we're reporting on true risk, and the application of a mitigating control for any of that, and then the automated provisioning of that access, and then that full audit trail being saved within whatever solution we're utilizing. That's really what we're looking for with that application access governance, because at that point, what we've done is we've taken our documented policies that were agreed upon with IT, business, and audit, and we fully automated them. So as long as someone is submitting their request through the system, it's forced through that policy. So what that's helping us do is ensure operational effectiveness. So if we think about ITGCs, IT general controls, you can have whatever process you want. It must operate effectively to pass audit. So if you're doing it manually, that's fine, or if you're doing it in an automated manner, that's fine, but it needs to operate effectively, meaning it needs to be done correctly each time. Automation is more effective than manual because it takes that human error out of it. And also because it is automated, it makes it more efficient. We can provision faster. You usually see a reduction from like 80 hours to 8 hours, or I like to say 2 weeks to 2 days for provisioning access out to users. And that's secure access that's already addressed for risk. And the full audit trail is documented. So when audit comes in to review that provisioning ITGC, they can actually look at it and see, nope, here's the full process. All the approvals are in place. I can see the documented control that was attached. It's all there. So we've not only provisioned access faster to our business, but we've sped up our audit process as well, because when audit comes in, they have a singular location to look for audit trails and all the evidence. So it's going to make that audit more efficient, because business and IT aren't going and grabbing tickets or emails, try to prove out approvals. it's already there for them. So we're really making our whole process, our whole governance piece more mature and more efficient and effective. And then continuous controls monitoring is really the last step in that link. And what continuous controls monitoring is where you start to incorporate in continuous quantification and monitoring of those controls. So when we talk about running an SOD check prior to provisioning access, that's saying, I'm aware that this user, I have an AP department, small head count, I know that they have to both create vendors and pay vendors. We're going to accept that risk. We're going to put in place a control where we're running some reports once a month to check certain things and make sure no one's doing anything inappropriate. That's a mitigating control being put in place for a risk. Continuous controls monitoring takes it one step further. You're monitoring 100% of transactions that are occurring within that system and getting a real-time notification if the risk actually occurs. So not just monitoring an SOD report that says this user has the potential. They can perform this risk of create and pay a vendor if they so choose because they have the access. But continuous monitoring is monitoring to say, did they ever actually perform it? And when they did, we send off that notification for immediate review. So they actually created and paid the exact same vendor. They did it on this day, this time, and they paid them this amount. That lets the business in real time monitor for anything that may be happening. So if we think about those fraudulent occurrences where millions of dollars may go out the door before anyone sees it, what this is doing is upfront letting you see immediately when anything is happening. And then that continuous management allows you to do things like your operational effectiveness of controls. If you have a risk of create and pay a vendor and you're saying that on a monthly basis you run certain reports, that's oftentimes manual. Someone's kicking off that report, they're reviewing it, and then they're putting their review and their sign off in an email or something, and they're I've seen them literally print it and sign and date it, and so they're saving that until audit comes around, because audit tests the effectiveness of your controls, they're operating correctly. What this will do is allow you to actually automate that process. You're automating the kicking off of that review. So that report is automatically sent out to that reviewer. The reviewer reviews it and attaches their evidence into the tool and saves it. That way, when audit comes in to review that it's operating effectively, all that documentation is already gathered there in one place and standardized. Those are the type of things that we can monitor for specific events. Oh, someone changed my sensitive data. I know it's sensitive for customer master data. I don't want anyone changing that without us being aware. You can monitor those things so that if someone executes a change to customer master data, you receive an immediate notification of that and can review it. That's continuous controls monitoring, right? So it's moving beyond the processes to grant people access and the management of that to real-time monitoring 100% of what they're actually performing in the system. And that is the goal we all aspire to get to. But each of these steps along the way, we all start somewhere. We all are currently somewhere in our journey. The goal is just to always be working towards that optimization, towards, as far as we can get in that maturity path. And the thing that I've placed at the bottom, this kind of hints at what Kelly mentioned earlier. This is adjacent to the conversation we're having here about access controls. But thinking about your system security and your network security and vulnerability management, that's always applicable. So no matter where you are in your path to governance of access maturity, network and system security is always applicable, because you can lock down your user's access and all you want to within the system, but if a bad actor is hacking your network itself to then overtake those IDs and perform something inappropriate with them, you've got a glaring weakness that you would need to address regardless. So that's why it's that baseline bottom piece there. So I know that was a lot of information, but again, I kind of like to start from the bottom and talk through from each step along the way, because again, no matter where you are in this journey, there's always optimizations and improvements that we can make. Even if you're already doing continuous controls monitoring, if you think about what Kelly mentioned earlier, starting from a single system, going out to these additional cloud applications, we can always expand what we're monitoring so that we are being even more secure in the totality of what we're looking at. there are always additional controls that we may want to automate and continuously monitor. So there's always something that we can be doing more better to improve our security and our and lower our risk of breaches or fraud or inappropriate things occurring within our system. Kelly, anything you want to add here, and maybe journeys you've seen your customers take?
No, you took the words out of my mouth about just making sure that no matter where you are on your journey. I mean, maybe you are just literally at documenting the policies. That's okay, but don't stay in that location. Make sure that you are understanding what you need to do next, and really expanding your governance and your compliance around how to maybe just do the next step, which may be basic automation. And the only other thing I would add is that having a tool that you can rely on that is going to get you to these next steps is vitally important to understanding and having visibility into your risks, being able to perform the automations. And you also said it too, a single source of system for the auditors. I'm laughing because as much as I spent a couple years in auditing, but the last thing I want to do from IT is to actually talk to auditors. I don't want them anywhere near me. I'm sure other people feel the same. So having a tool that you can literally just grant them access and say, look, here, we're doing everything. They're operating effectively. We know that we have the alerts that are in place, is vitally important to really making sure that and you can confidently say, yes, my controls are operating effectively. Here you go, auditors. It's on you literally handing it to them on a silver platter. So
I love that. Yes, I used to say, help me help you.
Yes.
I, as an auditor, didn't ever want to bother anyone. So if they had a tool, that was the best thing possible. Give me display access. I will go in, I will pull the reports. You don't have to talk to me. And on the IT side of the house, I knew how frustrating it was whenever you had to prepare everything for audit. So yes, the goal is definitely help me help you on all sides of it. IT has everything ready for audit. Audit doesn't have to ask IT for anything. It makes everyone's life easier. But again, that goes back to breaking down silos. IT has to know what audit's going to come looking for. And audit has to have well-defined control steps that they're going to follow and documentation that they're going to request that they can then share with IT and walk them through and inform them about. So IT knows what's being looked for and everyone's agreed on that. So we really need to go back to that, reducing silos and keeping everyone on the same team.
Yeah.
And just to kind of say, what do you get out of this? What are some of the benefits for going through this maturity and automation progress path? What do you get out of it? Obviously, this takes time. It takes investment of resources if you're obviously implementing a tool, that's going to be an investment of literal dollars, but then you also have to train your team on it and update your processes so everyone knows it's being followed. But why is it valuable? In our experience, I've worked with customers that are every size, from where they had 100 users in their major ERP to tens and tens and tens and thousands of users, tens of thousands of users. And in each of those, you see a very similar statistic come back, which is IT getting like a 50% task reduction. Pretty straightforward, right? If I'm not having to be the IT person who manually chases down your manager or owner of an entitlement for an approval before I go out and manually provision someone, if I don't have to do that anymore because it's all in a tool, I've regained that time. And what do I do with that time that I've regained? I can do business value add tasks. How many times are our IT people so bogged down with keeping the lights on that they can't get to those business requested projects? It may be something as simple as, hey, I would like you to create this custom report for me. I think it'd be very valuable, rather than us having to export all this data and manually create it ourselves. Can you just build it in the application? That's a common request that comes across, but you can't get to those until you keep the lights on every day. You get everyone provisioned or deprovisioned who left the company, all those sort of things. It allows them to be more effective at doing those really value-add tasks. Business users, a 70% cost reduction. Think about the simplest example of a user getting access provisioned. If it takes you 2 weeks to get a user access because of the manual effort to get that approved, that is 2 weeks that you're paying someone to sit there and someone else is having to do that job. So that is 80 hours of time. So think about whatever that person gets paid per hour and multiply it out. That's thousands of dollars every day that they're sitting there not performing a task for you. And that's one time that someone requests access. Think of how many users come into your system, into your company every year that you're processing those for, and you can just multiply it out, and that's the dollar amount right there. And that usually is almost the equivalent of what a tool costs. So that's a very simple way to see a significant value added, because the faster that we onboard our users, the faster that they can do our job or do their job. And then similarly for audit, right? If you're not having to manually gather all that data and keep it, so okay, keep the email that I showed that I signed off on something, and you know, keep this paper copy of something, or an automated copy that shows that I reviewed this report. If I'm not having to manually keep track of all that stuff, and then when the auditor comes in, parse through all of it and collate it all together and hand it over to them, I'm saving a significant amount of my time and therefore money for my division that I can, you know, use my time and effort for something else. And then internal audit and controls, an 80% risk reduction. This is really tied to that concept of, if we are aware of the risks that are in the system and we're actively managing and monitoring them, we're reducing the risk for the company overall. And then if we're using automated solutions where we can, in a more efficient and effective manner, gather that data, what that allows us to do with that time that we've gained back is to monitor more risks or more applications. And the more of those, the more coverage that we can get, the more we're going to reduce our risk as an organization, because we don't have unknowns sitting out there, or parameters that we're not addressing that we're unaware of for our, you know, if you think of surface attack, you know, breach capabilities, you know, the smaller the surface area that we have exposed for risk, the better off that we are. So those are common percentages that we see, you know, across our customer implementations. And Kelly, I know we're coming up right up on time, so I'll try to finish here in the next minute. Anything you want to add to this slide in terms of customer examples?
No, there was just a question actually that I wanted to add. It's how do we demonstrate return on investment to help secure management to buy into the solutions? And this is your slide. So Carrie's literally talking about the return on investment here. This is exactly how implementing a tool like this will really help organizations gain efficiency and see the return on investment. You know, and again, you know, that slide where we showed the cost of breaches and cyber attacks, that also is a great one. You know, really having security come into you know, implementations and have a tool will always pay for itself, even just in, you know, cost of implementing a project. So having the security built from the beginning will save you time and energy and audit costs in the long run. So
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, you can literally just sit down with pen and paper and go, how much time do I spend doing task XYZ that would be, you know, automated or addressed by this process? And you can work your way backwards with the math there at its most basic level. And then, like Kelly said, there's all those intangibles. What could be the potential cost of a breach, the potential brand impact, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'll just do a quick overview. I would be remiss if, as a vendor, I did not put some information out there about us as we're sponsoring this. So who is Pathlock? We're a market leader in application governance, risk, and compliance. We do offer solutions for application access governance, continuous controls monitoring, and cybersecurity application controls. You can see some of our 1,300 plus customers that we service. We are a global company, and you can see some of the reasons here that customers work with us on the left hand or on the right hand side. You know, a lot of great percentages there for where we've helped our customers address their risk and compliance needs. And what do these solutions look like? Again, we offer these 3 different products, and each of these products has these modules that you see listed here. So this is everything from, for application access governance, we cover risk analysis and remediation, compliant provisioning, your certifications, those are your user access reviews, your risk recertification, control recertification, role reviews, role management, Continuous controls monitoring, that is that controls management and risk quantification, monitoring of changes with that event notification. License management, exactly what it sounds like. You don't want to over provision or under provision licenses and have to true up with your application provider. It can be very, very costly. And then cybersecurity application control, so vulnerability management, threat detection and response, dynamic access control, so things like data masking, code scanning, transport control. So these are all things that we offer as a company. And please reach out if you have any questions about any of those or interest in them. We can absolutely provide you with details. And just to make sure I wrap up and leave time if we had any other questions that I haven't seen pop yet in the box. Key takeaways, I love to give tangible takeaways. Kelly and I talked through these to build this slide. We wanted to leave you with something actionable to think through if you found this interesting and you want to start approaching any of this. Think about planning holistically for more apps, not less. Establish a roadmap based on your goals, your current maturity, your resource constraints. So basically, think about the bites you take to eat the elephant, right? Don't tackle everything at once. It's just like that maturity curve, little steps at a time. You will get there eventually. Everyone starts somewhere, but the sooner you start chipping away at it, the sooner that you will be in a more compliant place. Keeping your auditors looped in, this goes back to breaking down those silos. Build that project and process and program together as a team. Avoiding inadequate training and documentation. You can build the best stuff in the world, but if you don't document it, people do not stay at their job forever. Eventually, when they retire or they leave or they transition jobs, you're going to have to train a new person. You want to make sure you have that in place to ensure that you have a continuous, successful program going forward. Modernize your controls, automate where you can. Leverage what's out there available to you as part of these tools, like rule sets, like controls out of the box, workflows out of the box. Really take advantage of that to improve and expand your control ecosystem on your apps. Broadening the scope of it, mitigate your risks, empower cross-functional teams to leverage data and insights in their day-to-day roles. We've seen the benefits that can come of this. Take that into account. See how you can benefit everyone in your organization, from IT to the business to audit, to put something like this in place and really make the most of it. So I know that was really fast. I just wanted to make sure in the last couple minutes we could get to any Q&A items. So Stephanie, if you have any questions you want to ask us, or Kelly, if there was anything you wanted to make sure to add to that last slide. I know I ran through it pretty quickly.
Good. Yeah, if there's any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. Again, if you do have any questions, please add them now into the chat box. Our first question is, what do you see as the biggest barrier to effective risk reduction in SAP landscapes?
Kelly, do you want to take that, the biggest barrier to risk reduction in SAP landscapes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to probably take it back to the silos, just because, you know, I think the biggest barrier is getting all of the lines of businesses and the managers to understand really why security is important and why they need to really take it seriously. And I would just say, as part of that, you know, from if you're, you know, doing IT security and you're trying to push that boulder uphill, is to just continually grow and learn and understand why it's important, so that you can really enable those leaders to come alongside you and to be your partner in it, instead of having to, you know, go against each other. Because the reality is that you're all in it for the same reasons and for the same end goal, which is to secure your environments and make sure that you know, your business is operating well, and that you're not exposing unnecessary risks.
Okay, and it looks like we just have like a minute or two for another question. Why can't a customer just buy the tools and manage internally?
I mean, you can. That's not that you can't do that. You can. It just depends on the experience of your internal teams. Do you have a team who understands your risk rule sets and can add the customizations needed from any kind of custom functionality you've built in your system? A rule set's going to come out of the box for a lot of applications. You need to assess it for anything custom you've created and add that in. If your team knows how to do that, fantastic. if you've built your controls out already, so it's just loading those into the tool, you can just purchase it and implement it and run it. People like when I used to be in consulting myself, or Kelly now with Turnkey, the value in partners like that is really when you don't maybe have really well established or developed processes, or maybe you just don't have the internal team resources to either implement or to understand and have and drive some of those complex conversations between the business and IT. Someone to kind of be the middleman that speaks business and can translate to IT and vice versa. That's where a lot of that value comes from. So it is not that you can't just buy it and stand it up and use it yourself. It really just depends on what your internal team structure looks like and what your needs are.
Yeah, and I'll just add, if you remember my one example about, the one organization that did just implement something and tried to manage it internally, that it's really vitally important that if you do believe that you have people on your team that can do it, that they are trained well and that they have the right understanding of what that tool is supposed to do. And if they don't, that's where your implementation partners or your advisory services or your consulting firms, that's really where they come in very handy, to make sure that they can actually train those users, have them understand the whys and the hows to do it, so that you can empower them and enable them to do their jobs well. Because everybody wants to be able to do their jobs well. So as long as organizations are giving their internal resources those skill sets, then yeah, let them run with it, but make sure that they have it first.
Okay, great. I think that's all the time we have for questions, but if you do have any more questions, I encourage you to reach out to us at info@pathlock.com, and we would be happy to answer any of those. And I just wanted to say thank you to Kelly and Carrie for presenting, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.